He publicly said she wasn't important. He said she was just decoration. What he didn't know was that she controlled the money keeping him alive. Hello, beautiful, bold family. Welcome back to another beautiful story. Your unwavering support means the world to me, and I'm committed to bringing you even more heartwarming stories as I continue to grow and evolve every day. If you're joining us for the first time today, please drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to officially become part of our bold family. Now, let's get into today's story. The air in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont was thick with money, perfume, and the faint metallic scent of ambition. This was the annual Metropolitan Charity Gala, the kind of event where people didn't just donate, they performed philanthropy, ensuring their names were etched in gold on the program and their faces were photographed for the society pages. Though Clara Hayes felt the familiar pressure of the evening settling on her shoulders like the heavy silk of her emerald gown. She looked every inch the successful businessman's wife, perfectly coiffed, serene, and utterly interchangeable with the dozen other impeccably dressed women orbiting the room. Her husband, Rob Hayes, however, was not interchangeable. Rob was the star tonight, or at least he believed he was. He had a booming laugh that cut through the polite chatter and a way of commanding attention simply by adjusting his cufflinks. He was currently holding court near the Raw bar, gesturing expansively as he explained the finer points of his latest venture, the Nexus project, to a small cluster of investors. Clara watched him from a distance, nursing a glass of sparkling water. She had learned long ago that at these events her role was ornamental. Look good, smile on cue, and most importantly, not interrupt. What Rob didn't know, what practically no one knew, was that Clara wasn't just decorative. She was the silent engine that had kept their family solvent through 3 of Rob's near-miss ventures over the past decade. While Rob chased flashy, high-risk deals that grabbed headlines, Clara managed the quiet, stable portfolio, the real estate holdings, the long-term investment funds, and the small, highly specialized venture capital firm. She ran out of a discreet downtown office, far from the glare of Rob's corporate spotlight. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was power. Clara, darling, don't look so forlorn. Rob's voice boomed as he approached, wrapping a possessive arm around her waist. He didn't wait for her response, his gaze already sweeping the room. We need to circulate. Senator Thompson just walked in. This is critical, sweetheart. If we land the senator's backing, Nexus is gold. Clara offered a practiced warm smile. I know, Rob. Just try not to overpromise the Q3 projections. The data is still softer than we anticipated, especially regarding the regulatory hurdles in New Jersey. Yeah. Rob squeezed her waist, a gesture that felt more like a warning than affection. And please, Clara, don't start with the spreadsheets tonight. This is about vision, not minutiae. Thompson doesn't care about regulatory hurdles. He cares about impact and influence. He pulled her across the polished floor, navigating the sea of black ties and designer dresses with the confidence of a man who believed he belonged exactly where he was. Before Clara could elaborate, Rob's hand shot out, resting heavily on the senator's forearm, pulling his attention away from her as if she were a momentary distraction. Senator, with all due respect, let's not bore ourselves with the details of the grassroots funding structure, Rob interjected, his smile tight but forced. He laughed. A short, sharp sound meant to be charming but coming across as dismissive. Clara is fantastic with the organizational side of things, but she handles the domestic accounts. She doesn't really get into the core strategy of the business. Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The domestic accounts? That was Rob's favorite euphemism for the hundreds of millions she managed, the money that kept his lifestyle afloat. Senator Thompson, sensing the shift in dynamics, looked awkwardly between husband and wife. Rob pressed his advantage, eager to regain control of the conversation. Now, Senator, back to the equity breakdown. The initial investment window closes next Tuesday, and frankly, we're oversubscribed. But for you, we can certainly carve out a piece. Clara stood silent, the warmth draining from her smile. She knew the senator was too polite to show offense, but she could see the subtle lowering of his regard for Rob. Rob had just traded strategic insight for sheer arrogance. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Rob dominating the air, dropping names and figures with reckless abandon. Clara remained planted beside him, a statue in emerald silk. She listened, not to Rob's sales pitch, but to the subtle cues, the senator's increasingly vague answers, the way his assistant kept checking his watch. Finally, the senator asked a highly specific question about the projected tax liabilities of the multi-state operating structure, a question that required precise legal knowledge, not just vision. Rob stammered. Well, Senator, that's a question for the legal team. Of course, we're still finalizing the optimal structure, but I assure you we're maximizing efficiency. Clara knew the answer instantly. She and her firm had researched this exact loophole last year for a major client. She opened her mouth, ready to provide the concise, legally sound explanation that would impress the senator and save Rob's pitch. But Rob cut her off again. Mank, turning to the senator with a patronizing chuckle, he placed a hand on Clara's shoulder and squeezed just hard enough to ensure she stayed quiet. "Oh, forgive me, Senator," Rob said, leaning in conspiratorially, lowering his voice just enough so the surrounding crowd wouldn't hear, but Clara certainly would. "She's just here to make the evening look good. Honestly, she's not important to the deal structure. She can be a bit distracting when the conversation turns serious." The words landed on Clara like a physical blow, cold and heavy. She's not important. It wasn't the first time Rob had dismissed her, but doing it in front of a potential 9-figure investor, equating her worth solely to her decorative presence, was a new low. It wasn't just disrespect, it was strategic negligence. Clara took a slow, deep breath, letting the insult settle. Not as pain, but as pure, crystalline focus. She waited for Rob to finish his current sentence, a meaningless assurance about quarterly returns, and then she gracefully pulled away from his grip. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Clara said, her voice smooth and low, carrying no trace of the humiliation she had just suffered. "If you'll forgive me, I need a moment to refresh." Rob didn't even turn around. "Fine, darling. Don't be long. I need you back here when we seal this." Clara simply nodded and walked away. She didn't hurry. She didn't rush to the restroom to fix makeup that wasn't smudged. Instead, she moved with deliberate calm toward the grand staircase at the far end of the ballroom, ascending slowly, ignoring the curious glances of the attendees. She was heading to the 3rd floor, to the private conference suites that overlooked the entire venue. Once she reached the upper landing, the noise of the gala faded into a distant, muffled buzz. The 3rd floor was reserved for the event organizers and the major financial underwriters, the people who actually made the magic happen. Far from the cameras, Clara paused outside a heavy mahogany door marked Executive Office Suite D. She straightened her gown, took one final breath, and opened the door. Inside Executive Suite D, the atmosphere was entirely different from the glittering chaos downstairs. The room was quiet, insulated by thick walls and plush carpeting that absorbed sound. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the ballroom, offering a god's-eye view of the crowd below, tiny, glittering figures moving according to invisible currents of power. 3 people turned as Clara entered. At the head of the polished walnut table sat Eleanor Price, the event's chief financial sponsor and one of the most discreet power brokers on the East Coast. Her silver hair was pulled into a precise chignon, her expression sharp and observant. Beside her stood Marcus Lee, General Counsel for the Metropolitan Foundation, and David Klein, Managing Partner of Klein and Roth Capital. Eleanor's lips curved into a knowing smile. "I was wondering when you'd come up," she said calmly. "You usually don't wait this long." Clara closed the door softly behind her. I needed to be certain," she replied evenly. Marcus glanced at his watch. "Is something wrong downstairs?" "We're about to finalize the donor commitments." Clara walked to the table and placed her clutch down with deliberate care. Her posture was relaxed, but her presence shifted the room instantly. This was not the silent spouse from the ballroom. "Oh yes," Clara said. "There's a problem with the Nexus project." David frowned. "Hayes project?" "It's one of the gala's headline investments." "It won't be," Clara replied. Silence followed, dense, expectant. Eleanor folded her hands. "Explain." "The capital structure Rob is pitching is fundamentally unstable," Clara said, her voice measured and precise. "He's overselling regulatory flexibility that doesn't exist and underestimating tax exposure in 3 states. If Nexus proceeds as proposed, the foundation will be exposed to long-term liabilities that will surface within 18 months. Marcus stiffened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Clara said calmly. "It's an inevitability." "Macapo." She reached into her clutch and withdrew a slim tablet. With a few taps, she projected a series of documents onto the room's private display. Clean spreadsheets, legal annotations, and color-coded risk assessments. "Okay, these are the same loopholes his legal team believes they've secured," she continued. "They were closed quietly last quarter. I verified this personally with 2 regulatory councils in New Jersey and Illinois." David leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "War shush this. War prepared Lara. War peer." "Why haven't we seen this?" "Because Rob doesn't know," Clara said simply. Eleanor studied the screen, then looked back at Clara. Not with surprise, but with confirmation. "You're certain?" Eleanor asked. Clara met her gaze steadily. "I built the contingency models myself." Another pause. Then Eleanor exhaled slowly. "Then Nexus is dead." Marcus swallowed. "We can't pull a headline investment without an alternative." Clara tapped the screen once more. A new file appeared. "You won't be pulling anything," she said. "You'll be replacing it." Yeah, the title on the display read, Urim Stregic Holdings, Pridink Aleutian Bar Reef. David's eyebrows shot up. "That's your firm?" "Yes," Clara replied. Marcus blinked. "I thought Aurum avoided public-facing philanthropy." "We do," Clara said, "until it becomes necessary." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a slow smile forming. "You're offering to underwrite the gap." "I'm offering more than that," Clara said. "A fully compliant, low-risk investment vehicle with guaranteed transparency, scalable returns, and 0 reputational exposure for the foundation." David let out a low whistle, and Clara didn't hesitate. "Rob doesn't factor into this decision." Eleanor chuckled softly. "I suspected as much." Down below, the ballroom erupted into applause as Rob Hayes raised a glass, unaware that the foundation beneath his ambitions was quietly being dismantled by the very person he had just dismissed. "Yo." Eleanor rose from her chair. "Finalize the reallocation," she said. Quietly, she turned to Clara, her gaze sharp and respectful. "And when this is done," Eleanor added, "I think it's time your role stops being a secret." Clara allowed herself the faintest smile. "So do I." The applause downstairs echoed faintly through the windows as Clara exited Executive Suite D. She moved with the same composed grace she always had, but something fundamental had shifted. The quiet invisibility she once wielded as protection was no longer necessary. As she descended the staircase, her eyes tracked the subtle changes unfolding below. Staff members moved with new urgency. Tablets were checked. Assistants whispered into headsets. The Metropolitan Foundation's lead coordinator crossed the floor with purposeful speed, heading not toward Rob, but away from him. Rob, still buoyed by his own confidence, was mid-sentence when he noticed the shift. And once the final tranche clears, he was saying, "We expect exponential." The coordinator interrupted him politely but firmly. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "we need to speak with you privately." Rob frowned, irritation flashing across his face. "Can this wait?" "I'm in the middle of a discussion. I'm afraid it can't." "Kale." The senator excused himself with a nod that carried more distance than respect and drifted away without another word. Rob watched him go, confusion tightening his jaw. He followed the coordinator toward the edge of the ballroom. Just as Clara stepped onto the main floor, their eyes met. For the first time that evening, Rob looked unsettled. "Clara," he said sharply, motioning her over. "What's going on? Why is Thompson leaving?" Clara stopped in front of him, her expression calm, unreadable. The Nexus project has been pulled from the Foundation's investment slate," she said. Rob laughed once, short and disbelieving. "That's impossible. I just spoke to Eleanor." "Yes," Clara replied. "So did I." The color drained from his face. "You... what?" His voice dropped. "You went upstairs?" "Yes." Murmurs rippled through the nearby clusters of guests. A few heads turned. Phones slipped discreetly from pockets. This was no longer a private moment. Rob leaned closer, his voice tight and low. "You blindsided me." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You blindsided yourself. This was my deal," he hissed. "No," she said calmly. "This was your performance." The coordinator shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hayes, we'll need you to remain available for a formal debrief tomorrow." Rob barely heard her. You humiliated me," he said to Clara. Clara tilted her head slightly. "You did that yourself, when you told a room full of decision-makers that I wasn't important." A heavy silence settled between them. Around them, the gala continued, music swelling, laughter returning. But the hierarchy had changed. Guests who had once orbited Rob now drifted elsewhere, their attention recalibrating. Enor Price approached, her presence commanding immediate respect. "Clara," Eleanor said warmly, "the board has approved the preliminary allocation. We'll announce the partnership before the night is over." She turned to Rob, her tone polite but final. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for your enthusiasm. Unfortunately, we won't be moving forward with Nexus." Rob nodded stiffly, unable to respond. Eleanor turned back to Clara. "And care to join me on stage for the closing remarks?" Clara glanced at Rob one last time. This time there was no anger, only clarity. "Yes," she said. "I'd be happy to." As they walked toward the stage, the lights subtly shifted, conversations hushed, anticipation built. Rob remained where he was, suddenly small in a room that no longer needed him. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara was seen, not as an accessory, not as a distraction, but as power. The orchestra softened as Eleanor Price stepped onto the stage, the room instinctively quieting. A spotlight followed her, crisp and controlled, cutting through the ballroom's gold and crystal glow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor began, a voice smooth and assured, "thank you for your generosity tonight. Before we conclude, the Metropolitan Foundation has an important announcement regarding one of this year's cornerstone initiatives." A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. Clara stood just behind the curtain of light, her hands relaxed at her sides. She could feel the weight of the moment, not as nerves but as inevitability. Eleanor gestured toward her. "Please welcome Clara Hayes, managing partner of Aurum Strategic Holdings." A pause. Then applause, measured at first, then growing as recognition spread. A few guests exchanged surprised glances. Others leaned in, suddenly attentive. Clara stepped forward into the light. From across the room, Rob watched, frozen. This wasn't the applause he was used to, the polite acknowledgement given to spouses. This was something else entirely. Eleanor continued, "After careful review, the board has chosen to move forward with Aurum Strategic Holdings." as our lead investment partner for the upcoming fiscal cycle. A murmur swept the ballroom. Clara took the microphone. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying effortlessly. "The Foundation's mission aligns closely with the work my firm has been doing quietly for years, building sustainable systems that last beyond headlines." Her gaze moved across the audience, not searching for approval but acknowledging peers. "We believe real impact doesn't require spectacle," she continued. "It requires discipline, transparency, and respect for the structures that hold everything together." Polite laughter followed. Then nods. Then more applause. Clara handed the microphone back to Eleanor and stepped slightly aside. Down below, Rob felt something fracture, not loudly, not publicly, but irrevocably. He realized too late that the woman he had dismissed for years had been building something far larger than his ego ever allowed him to see. Eleanor concluded the remarks, raising her glass. "To clarity," she said, "to integrity. And to the people who do the work when no one is watching." Glasses lifted. The orchestra swelled. Again. "Clara." As the evening resumed, Clara moved effortlessly through the room, this time approached, not overlooked. Conversations shifted. Invitations followed. Rob remained at the edge of the ballroom, surrounded by noise, yet utterly alone. Clara passed him once more near the exit. He opened his mouth to speak. She didn't stop. Not because she was angry, but because she was finished. And that was the moment everyone understood. Oh, she had never been in his shadow. He had simply been standing in her way. Some people think power is loud, others think it's visible. Okay, but the most dangerous power? It's the one you ignore until it decides you're no longer necessary.